very much. Yeah, so my role is building structures, not just the built ones, but all structures. And I was in brackets because I certainly don't want to say that I'm head of sustainability for the whole of Ramboll because there's plenty of other very
Indeed.
talented people. But I am a structural engineer by background, and I moved into the sustainability leadership about 18 months ago after just having a passion for many years. And I get to lead our team of about 200 structural engineers in Ramboll to design lower embodied carbon structures and think about circular economy. And the stuff I'm sharing today is a lot of stuff that I've been sharing internally. So I'm really happy to be able to share this with you all and talk about circularity in a practical sense. And that is through pre-redevelopment audits. And we hope that that would accelerate our circular economy. Before we get started on what they are and how we do them, just a kind of a quick reflection on the state of the Earth really right now. So you'll know that 40% of global CO2 emissions come from the built environment, um, but 50% of the extracted materials, natural extracted materials, go into the built environment. And earlier this year, Edward Bernardsky had a really brilliant exhibition on um, in London called Extraction and oh, I forgot the other word, but anyway, it was fantastic, and he's got some beautiful photos, kind of scary photos of the way that we are mining the Anthropocene. These are one of the mines. So that 50% is complete within our influence in the built environment, and then 60% of waste in the UK comes from the construction and demolition sector. So again, one that is really relatable to each one of us in this call, and that we do all have some level of influence over. And there was a stat going around earlier on the year. It was like we demolished about 100,000 buildings per year in the UK, which is such a scary number. And it's because we treat these buildings with no respect at all. We think of them as pretty disposable and that they're time bound, whether that's time bound to an architectural style, um, or an era or a use. A lot of these buildings are being think about in this very strict sense of the 30 or the 50-year lifespan. And that doesn't lend itself to a circular economy unless it is a temporary structure that has been designed for disassembly, which is acceptable. But we need to change this shift, this attitude from being one of, that disrespect and disposable to one that has significant respect, not just for the building, but for the materials and the workmanship that's gone into it. Now, you could say that perhaps a lot of buildings now don't have that same level of workmanship as they used to, but why not bring that respect back into workmanship and hours? How many hours do we spend designing a building? That's what I'm starting to think about and talk to our clients about. It's not just the valuation you get for that built thing. It's the valuation of the time and hours, whether that is our designers' times or whether it's the contractors or the subcontractors on site. There will be millions of hours that go into these buildings. For them to be demolished 25 years later, completely unacceptable. We have to think about material stewardship. So we want to be thinking about that these materials are there to last. They are there to be handed over to the next occupant, or they're there to be handed on to a second-hand marketplace. We need to think about stewardship in our materials. And we have to be custodians of our buildings. These are buildings that we want to last lifetimes. So we have to be treating them with that respect to have that custodianship. And this is a lovely picture of a project that some of my colleagues worked on at Clifford's Tower in York, and they really, they reimagined this space, allowing it to be a really beautiful part and of celebration of the history of York, and adding, even these special, parts of CLT to kind of bring a modern twist with biogenic materials to an old structure. It's such a fantastic celebration and the way that we should be thinking about our built environment. But to get to that point, we need to understand what we have in our buildings. Like, what's that intrinsic value? And I was at the launch of the circular dew tank on yesterday, and I really recommend looking it up if you've not heard about it. And it's basically a group of a group of built environment professionals that are really passionate about accelerating the circular economy. And the president of RICS is one of the leaders of that group, and she said that she's been advocating for surveyors to be starting valuations based on the intrinsic and residual value of the materials within that building. And I thought if they can get to that point, that is going to change circularity because at the moment that is just not at all part of valuations. Um, so if we can really understand what's in the materials, like especially if you've got really high value materials that have that reuse potential, it's going to be huge for the circularity. But how do we understand what we've got in our buildings? So you've probably heard of pre-demo audits. Um, you might even seen some. They vary in quality quite significantly. Um, but a few years ago, pre-redevelopment audits came into a bit of a vocabulary, and I want to kind of share what the key difference is between those audits, the outcomes, the inputs, who does them, when do you do them, and why do you do them. But you might have heard some people doing them for various reasons. You might have heard that they're a requirement within certain parts of the London Plan. Local authorities such as Westminster City Council or the City of London ask for a pre-redevelopment audit, or there's some kind of small text or similar and equal to be carried out before the decision to demolish has been made. You might want to do it for BREEAM. It's an optional credit in the waste section, so some people like to do that. However, I largely still see BREEAM in audits as a box ticking exercise rather than actually being used to inform design. Or you generally care and you really want to contribute to a circular built environment. So hopefully, you all on the call are in the last bucket of people who really want to do this for a purpose and simply not just to comply or for, achieving an excellent rating in your BREEAM. So what's the key difference between these? First thing, it's really, really important to understand between a pre-redevelopment and a pre-demo audit is that a pre-redevelopment audit aims to understand the existing building and consider the options for redevelopment of that building, following typically the hierarchy, which you might have seen as a kind of upside down triangle of um, refit and refurbish, substantial refurbishment, and then extension or reclaim and reuse. So you want to be following that. And this audit doesn't, a pre-redevelopment audit doesn't consider about where the recycling might be or what those waste streams could be. It really focuses on the reuse potential of that building. I was part of the I-Struct group who wrote the Circular Economy Guidance, that is the largest textbook ever produced by the institution. And we went around months understanding whether we should call it a pre-redevelopment audit, a pre-development audit, a reuse assessment. And it's really difficult because actually there's different language and people call it different things. People will call it a pre-dem audit or they'll call it pre-refurb audit. And the language is interchangeable, but the outcomes are actually very different. So it's really important to know. But we decided to stick with this because it's adopted by the GLA. Whereas a pre-dem audit, typically it's carried out by a demo contractor, just aims to quantify the demolition waste, recycling routes, and the European waste catalogue codes, basically to comply with the construction and waste requirements they have on site. So it's never been there to focus on circularity. Although it had some circular outcomes, its purpose, pre-demo audit's been out for quite a while, its purpose has never been there. You can actually look at the original demolition protocol document with the ICE, which was published in 2008. It has not been updated since. So, that kind of says it all. So pre-redevelopment audits focus on maximizing reuse, understanding what's there in the building, and looking at ways that you can embed the existing structure, windows, architectural finishes, MEP into the redevelopment, whether that you are looking to refurb the whole building, parts of the building, demolish maybe a little part, extend it, whatever that may fancy. You can do a pre-redevelopment audit even if you decide to fully demolish, because you could still use those elements in the redevelopment. Obviously, we don't want to be demolishing. Ideally, kept in situ is the best, but it still informs that final decision. Whereas that pre-demolition audit is after the decision to demolish has been made. So who carries out these audits? You'll find people have different opinions on this. And I'm not saying this is the right answer. This is my opinion of who should carry these audits out after working in this space for about 5 years. Pre-redevelopment audits, the best people to do these are architects and engineers, people who really understand the building and can take the information to inform the design. And it has to be done at the earliest stage possible. I think ideally REBA stage 0 to 1 is the best time, but it happens typically at REBA stage 2. But you have to be quite careful because a lot of decisions have already been made at REBA stage 2. So ideally as early as possible. And getting a team that's well informed, that understands the building and understand what's required from the building in the audit is essential. But there's a lot of information out there now that tells you how to write these. So you don't have to be an absolute expert in audits, but if you understand construction and how things are deconstructed and put together, then you're grand. Pre-dem audit needs to be a competent, and I emphasize competence because I've seen crap 3-page pre-dem audits that are completely unacceptable, that are simply a box ticking. I've done my bit. I need to do what I do for my site. But I've also seen the opposite. I've actually seen a few, especially London contractors, demo contractors, they're like some McGee's or Kelpie, doing quite high quality pre-demo audits now. And ideally, if you could do those in the REBA stage 2 to 3, so even if you're demolishing the building, you can still inform some elements to be integrated, whether that is you've got concrete waste, you could take that to you could paid up partner with Wholesome, who are looking at recycled aggregates and sequestering it in carbon and doing some really interesting innovation to put it back into the building. That's the best time. But typically they're done at REBA stage 4 to 5 when you get the demo contractor on, because a client who wants to pay a demo contractor come on early, I think the best thing to do is try to get them on a PCSA if possible, but I appreciate it's a very hard one to convince any client on. But if they care about circular economy, that is what I would be saying. So the pre-redevelopment audit focuses on that, like I say, the upside down triangle hierarchy of reuse. So you want to be focusing on the asset level. So in the audit, you would say, can we reuse this building as it currently is? I've carried out one which was very politically difficult. As the building itself, it was a 1920s building, was perfectly fine as it is, but they wanted to redevelop it into something that isn't original use. So it was kind of like a bit of a well, actually, it's a similar use. It was a historic medical teaching school that they wanted to turn into modern day labs. And anyone who's worked in the kind of sci-tech lab space will understand like there's a lot of serviceability requirements, whether it's MEP or floor vibration, and it just didn't fit. So when you assess that building, it actually fits for its existing use, but can it fit for this new use? It gets quite tricky, and there's still not great guidance on how to navigate that because it gets into politics, it gets into local plans, it gets into developers' money, and it's a bit unclear. But can the building work? Does it work with its existing use? So is there issues with it, performance issues, etc.? Then you want to try and prioritize the elements in situ, if possible, whether that's foundations or part of the structural frame. Then elements ex situ, which is becoming a bit more common now, and we're getting around all the insurance warranty issues with a lot of these. That could be precast planks, it could be steel beams, it could be bricks, it could be roof tiles, anything like that is great. And then you've got the component level, maybe your smaller ones, like I would say like the roof tile probably falls into that, and windows, but very, very nearly impossible to reuse windows, to be honest, unless I would say it's downcycling rather than reuse. So that process is assessment of the existing structure and the systems within the building, identifying those reusable elements, and a bit of a feasibility study, whether that could be embedded in the new design. That I would say is like above and beyond, perhaps. There's no strict criteria of what has to be in this, but I produced the section in the iStruct guide which says what we would recommend to do to have a high quality assessment. But I would say I've heard very mixed bags from the BRE and the local authorities on what they'll accept. Like again, there's no quality, and that's a big issue. And it's something I've been thinking about. How can we drive some type of quality assurance in these audits to ensure that they're actually useful and helpful? And that goal is to retain as much as possible and maximize reuse. And it's about collaboration. I've done the audits myself as a structural engineer, but I don't typically have as good experience on certain elements of the building. So it's always better if you can do it as a multi-disc collaboration. Would be my strong preference now, but it's quite hard because it's not business as usual. And audits are still quite new to clients. So if you can get that embedded into your services um, as a multidisciplinary team, then that's the best thing possible rather than an add-on. Whereas the pre-demo audit, you'd be going to site, doing a really quick assessment. You would be getting an inventory of materials. Often, what I've seen is guessed materials, not actually what's there. And then they have to identify hazard materials. I think it's useful to do all those things in a pre-redevelopment audit if you can, but completely cognizant that it depends on whether your site's occupied or not, whether you've got any existing building information. I think there's a more scalable approach to pre-redevelopment audits, whether that's you could do like a map progression, understand what's there, and talk about the history of the building, versus a pre-demo audit is quite like I would say factual, but it's not. But they try and say what they think's in the building. And that is to basically reduce material sent to landfill. Although I'm now seeing the contractors, the progressive contractors wanting to contribute to that being potentially being reused in the redevelopment if possible. Often it's too late. And they need that collaboration between the demo contractors, sometimes environmental consultants, sometimes waste stream owners. Typically, they already have that supply chain there, so it's not so much a collaboration, but it's just call up your mate at the concrete recycling centre. So the key differences, pre-redevelopment audit has to be before you get anywhere in designing the project, ideally, whereas the pre-demo audit is typically before the demolition starts, although I really encourage that to be done earlier. For certain local authorities, you have to do both if there's any proposed demolition. So often the pre-redevelopment audit would be significantly before the pre-demo one. But sometimes they just ask for pre-demo. It really depends on the local authorities and what they're asking for. I really do expect that to change in the next 2 years. I'm starting to see other local authorities just copying Westminster now. So they're going to be a trend soon. Um, the outcomes are completely different and the quality is often completely different. Who knows in time whether they'll merge into something that is just one audit at the earlier stages. We'll see. Um, and the kind of outcomes of this, we want to embed sustainable reuse in the construction, whereas a lot of contractors just see it as waste management. So, but again, it's completely scalable. So looking at the input and output, for ideally for both of these assessments, you would have the same quality of inputs, but doesn't exist, to be honest. But for me doing a pre-redevelopment audit, I'd be looking at plans and drawings, any old reports or specs, anything that's been done in the building since it's that you can get your hands on. If there's survey data, fantastic. Often doesn't happen, or the client doesn't want to pay for it that early. Um, any material samples, anything like that, and ideally you'll have an asbestos survey. And that would go into a pre-demo. Would have a material inventory report, a recovery plan, and various waste management documentation, whereas the pre-redevelopment audit, you'd be going a bit more holistic, agnostic to the condition, the reuse feasibility, um, how you can embed that into the design. And if you've got good records, you could also have an inventory. I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. Um, so I'm sorry, I've put the slide in, but actually I want to show you some examples. My title is wrong, but I want to show you some examples of what some of these audits, the outcomes have looked like in some of my reports. This was a pre-redevelopment audit that I had done. The picture in the middle is not the building because unfortunately it's under NDA. So I've replaced it with just a 3D Lego building. But this was the kind of outcome. We went really deep into this building at the early stages to really understand how many materials, because we wanted to convince the client not to demolish this building. So we were trying to show the value, the waste that they would generate as a result of demolishing it. So did a lot of calculations on how much material was there, which was not easy because we basically had microfiche drawings. But we estimated that there was a significant amount of masonry, and actually a lot of that masonry would have really high value, so that could be recovered even if they decided to demolish. And we went into, like I say, this was really detailed. You don't have to be this detailed. We looked at basically an assessment of these materials. So we looked at where it was in the building, because there was like 5 different parts of this building. its condition, the quantity of them, the standardization, the authenticity, recoverability, the health and safety aspects of like trying to deconstruct it, and logistics, the whole life carbon savings as well as a result of recovering it, its monetary value, and if there was any performance documentation. So that kind of came up with a bit of a matrix for us to understand what elements would be worth recovering if you couldn't recover it all, because it's not realistic to recover all the elements in the building. Um, Deconstruction can take up to triple the program of a typical like hard and heavy plant-based demo. So, that can make or break a project essentially from the client side in terms of their investment. So you have to kind of be a bit pragmatic to say, actually, okay, well, we're not going to try and recover all these hollow pot fours because there's no resale value. They're not, you know, the whole life carbon savings. Yes, they're high, but basically allows you to have that discussion in a bit of an easier way with the client. Um, we'd actually carried out a pre-demo audit, which I don't typically like doing, but it's because we designed the building and the demo contractor wasn't keen on doing the audit. Um, so we did it for them, made it super high quality, looking at all the beam sizes as well, specifically because we were recovering the steel beams, and went into really detailed pictures and sections, drawing out everything that was there, which helped inform it into the new design of a building on a different site. This was another example that I put into the iStruct guidance document, showing about like visual ways that you could communicate markups of the different elements that you might want to reuse. So in this building, there was elements that we were reusing in situ, and there were some parts that we were deconstructing. So and then labeling up the beams and columns that could then be put into a tabular style that you can assess versus member size, how many do you think there are, and essentially you get this kind of like kit of parts that allows you to work with it in the new design. So in conclusion, we've got the pre-redevelopment audit that really focuses on the high level reuse assessment of the building. It should be done by, the architects, the engineers, um, anyone that can help take that information and put it into the redesign is where the value is the greatest. And the pre-demo audits typically carried out just before demolition, focusing on minimizing materials to landfill. But the scalability of the audits are vast at the moment. But if you can get a demolition contractor on board and show them the quality you want, or guide them against the iStruct guidance or any other guidance out there to drive them to do better, or if you've seen a really bad audit, then feed that back is my is my guidance too, because we're not going to get better quality information to drive a circular economy if they keep producing three-page pre-demo reports that don't actually help inform anything. And if you want to learn more, you can find all the information about what I've just shared, plus so much more on the reuse of materials. So we break down this book into the reuse of concrete, steel, masonry, facades, and timber, into very detailed chapters about the technical feasibility, warranties, how you would test it, etc. So if you're interested, then I'd recommend you purchase a copy of that. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Brogan. Very interesting. Lots of cover there. I mean, when you